My name is Emily, I'm 35, and at my nephew's first birthday party, my own sister announced that her son was my late husband's child and that she was taking half of my $950,000 house. Before I tell you how that ended for her, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The air in the brightly decorated living room was thick with the cloying sweetness of vanilla frosting and the slightly off-key, enthusiastic singing of Happy Birthday. A constellation of primary-colored balloons hugged the ceiling, and a cheerfully crooked banner spelling out Leo IS1 was strung across the main wall. I was a black hole in this universe of joy, standing near the back in a simple, unadorned dress the color of mourning. It had only been 3 months since I'd stood at my husband Michael's graveside, the cold November wind whipping at that same black fabric. This party was my first real foray back into the world of the living, a world that felt alien and jarringly loud. My sister, Rachel, had been insistent. "It'll be good for you, Em," she'd urged, her voice a practiced symphony of sympathy that now, in hindsight, sounded like nails on a chalkboard. "You can't hide forever. Leo would love to see his auntie." Leo, blissfully unaware of the drama simmering around him, giggled in his high chair, his face a modern art masterpiece of smeared blue frosting and cake crumbs. Guests, friends of Rachel's I barely knew, milled about, balancing flimsy paper plates and plastic cups of punch. It was a perfect, cliched tableau of suburban celebration. And then, Rachel, a champagne flute held aloft like a scepter, tapped a spoon against the glass. Ting, ting, ting. The light, happy chatter sputtered and died. She beamed, a wide, predatory smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her gaze swept the room and landed on me, locking on with unnerving intensity. It was the kind of look that implied we were co-conspirators, sharing a delicious, private joke. We were not. "I just want to thank you all so much for coming to celebrate my little man's big day," she began, her voice resonating with a practiced warmth that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. "This year has been incredibly difficult for our family." She paused for dramatic effect, allowing a single, perfect tear to well in the corner of her eye before she dabbed it away. With Michael's tragic, sudden passing, her voice broke artfully. I felt a hot, prickling sensation crawl up the back of my neck. I wanted to scream. But even in the deepest darkness, there is always a glimmer of light. And I have some news that I want to share with all of you, our closest friends. News that is, in its own beautiful way, a continuation of Michael's legacy. A low, confused murmur rippled through the crowd. People shifted uncomfortably. I remained perfectly still, a statue carved from ice, my drink untouched in my hand. I knew, with the kind of gut-deep, bone-chilling certainty that defies logic, exactly what was coming next. I had been rehearsing this moment in my mind for weeks. "You see," she continued, her voice gaining a triumphant strength, "Leo is more than just my son. He's Michael's son, too." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was a physical force, a wave of shock that rippled from person to person. Heads whipped around to stare at me, their faces a grotesque gallery of pity, morbid curiosity, and second-hand embarrassment. They saw the grieving widow in her funereal black, now publicly branded as the wronged wife. Rachel let the bombshell detonate, savoring the shockwave before delivering the payload. And because Michael loved his son, his only son, he made sure he would be provided for. She reached into her stylish, oversized purse and, with the flourish of a seasoned magician pulling a rabbit from a hat, produced a folded sheaf of papers. According to his last will and testament, his child inherits half of his estate. That means, Emily, darling, the endearment was a poisoned dart, that Leo and I will be taking our rightful half of your $950,000 house. She held the document aloft, a victory flag in the war she had just publicly declared. It was a copy of a will I knew intimately, every clause and subclause memorized. The will Michael and I had drafted and signed together 12 years ago, back when I thought our life was a fortress of love and trust. The will that was now as worthless as the marriage vows he had shattered. The room was utterly silent now, the only sound the happy, oblivious babbling of the baby at the center of the storm. Everyone was watching me. Waiting. Waiting for the tears, the denial, the accusations, the inevitable, hysterical breakdown. I felt a strange, wild bubble of laughter rising from my chest, so powerful and inappropriate that I had to physically bite the inside of my cheek, tasting the coppery tang of blood, to force it back down. My reaction wasn't grief. It wasn't even pure rage. It was a cold, sharp, and terrifying calm. Because Rachel, in her moment of ultimate, smug triumph, had just walked, smiling, directly into a meticulously constructed trap. She had no idea what I already knew. She had no idea what I had done. And as I looked at my sister's triumphant face, the only question that echoed in the silent, hollow chamber of my heart was, how long have I been waiting for this exact moment? 12 years ago, the only thing I was waiting for was a lifetime of quiet, ordinary happiness. I met Michael when I was 23, fresh out of college and brimming with a naive optimism that seems almost painful to remember now. He wasn't the loudest man in the room, not the charismatic center of attention. His charm was a slow burn. It was in the details, the way his shoes were always impeccably polished, the comforting warmth in his steady, hazel gaze, the rare and wonderful fact that he actually listened when you spoke, his head tilted slightly as if your words were the most important thing in the world. He made me feel seen, heard, and cherished. Rachel, older by 5 years and infinitely more worldly in my eyes, gave him her enthusiastic seal of approval. "He's perfect for you, Em," she'd gushed, linking her arm through mine as we watched him across a crowded room at a friend's party. "He's solid. The real deal. You two are going to be disgustingly happy." I soaked up her words like a sponge. She was my sister, my built-in best friend, my lifelong confidant. If she said he was the one, then he was the one. For more than a decade, I lived inside that beautiful, gilded cage of belief. I had it all, the loving, devoted husband and the loyal, supportive sister. A perfect, stable life built on a foundation of unshakable trust. I was a fool. A happy, trusting fool. The foundation hadn't just been rotting for years, it had been hollowed out from beneath me, leaving only a fragile, paper-thin veneer of normalcy. The first crack I actually allowed myself to see appeared last summer. Michael, a senior project manager at a prestigious architectural firm, started working late. At first, it was plausible. A big project in the city, a looming deadline. I played the part of the supportive wife, making him a plate, covering it with foil, and leaving it in the oven for when he finally dragged himself home, smelling of the city and exhaustion. But then the exceptions became the rule. He'd come home long after I'd gone to bed, smelling faintly of a cloying, floral perfume that wasn't mine. He started guarding his phone like it was a state secret, tilting the screen away from me at the dinner table, his thumb swiping furiously before he'd pocket it with a too casual, just work stuff. You know how it is. Around the same time, a subtle shift occurred in Rachel. She'd always been a constant presence in our lives, popping by for coffee unannounced, treating our home like her own. But now, she started avoiding my gaze. Our easy, flowing conversations became stilted, pockmarked with awkward silences that she would frantically paper over with overly enthusiastic questions about my garden or my book club. She, a paralegal with a modest salary and perpetual complaints about her finances, started sporting designer handbags and shoes that I, an accountant, knew for a fact were far beyond her means. When I commented on a particularly expensive-looking leather tote, she just laughed it off with a flippant wave of her hand. "I've got a secret admirer, I guess," she'd said with a sly wink. The lie was so lazy, so insulting in its lack of effort, that it felt like a physical slap. The moment that shattered the veneer for good, the moment the vague, sickening suspicion coiling in my gut crystallized into cold, hard, undeniable fact, was a Tuesday afternoon in October. It was gray and drizzling, one of those days that saps the color from the world. I'd stopped by Rachel's apartment to drop off a cookbook she'd sworn she needed for a dinner party. She wasn't home, but she'd texted me that the door was unlocked. Her apartment was messy, clothes draped over chairs, mail scattered on the counter. As I placed the book on her cluttered coffee table, a glint of silver caught my eye from the depths of her beige shag rug. I bent down, my fingers closing around the object. It was a cufflink. A heavy, sterling silver cufflink with a square of black onyx inlaid in the center. It was one of a pair I had painstakingly chosen and saved for months to buy for Michael on our 10th wedding anniversary. I stood there in the silence of my sister's apartment, the metal growing cold in the palm of my hand. My heart didn't break, it felt like it simply stopped beating. The air left my lungs in a silent, painful whoosh. It wasn't just the cufflink. It was a sudden, horrifying avalanche of understanding. The late nights. The secret phone calls. The expensive, unearned gifts. The averted eyes. The perfume. It all clicked into place with the sickening, final finality of a morgue drawer sliding shut. My husband. And my sister. When I finally found my voice and called her, I tried to keep it steady. "Hey, I dropped off the book. You left one of Michael's cufflinks here." Her laugh on the other end of the line was high and brittle, stretched thin with falsity. "Oh my God, that thing? I borrowed them for a costume party ages ago. I was a spy. Must have forgotten to give it back." "Don't be so dramatic, Em. It's just a cufflink." She patted my arm condescendingly when I saw her later that day, her touch feeling like a spider crawling on my skin, her smile a perfect mask of pity for her silly, overwrought little sister. I smiled back. It was the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. "Oh, of course. That makes sense. No problem." I walked out of her apartment, got into my car, and drove home in a daze, the city lights blurring through the rain on my windshield. I didn't cry. Not then. The part of me that could cry, the soft, trusting, loving part, had been cauterized. It had frozen solid on Rachel's shag rug. In its place, something new and terrifying and cold was beginning to form. The naive Emily died that afternoon. The woman who drove home was someone else entirely. She was a woman who now understood that when your world is built on lies, you don't tear it down with screams and accusations. You dismantle it, piece by piece, with the quiet, methodical precision of a demolition expert. And you wait. You wait for the perfect moment to press the detonator. That night was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark of our living room, the house silent around me, staring at a framed photo on the mantelpiece. The three of us, me, Michael, and Rachel, smiling on a beach in the Outer Banks years ago, arms slung around each other. A monument to a colossal lie. I finally let the pain wash over me, a black, suffocating tidal wave of grief and betrayal so immense I thought it would physically tear me apart. I let myself feel it all, the searing humiliation, the white-hot rage, the vast, hollowed-out emptiness where 12 years of love used to be. I cried then. A silent, ugly, wrenching cry, my body shaking with sobs I refused to let make a sound. It was a funeral for the life I thought I had. It was a baptism for the woman I now had to become. By the time the first gray light of dawn seeped through the blinds, the tears were gone. The pain had not vanished, but it had changed. It had been compressed, forged by the intense pressure of my grief into something hard and sharp, a weapon. I got up, my movements stiff, and made coffee. My hands were perfectly steady. The time for emotion was over. It was time for a plan. I didn't confront them. I didn't pack a bag and leave a dramatic note. That would have been a release for them, a storm they could weather together. I denied them that. I became a ghost in my own home, a phantom of the wife and sister I once was. I smiled at Michael when he came home late, asking about his day. I listened patiently on the phone as Rachel complained about her job or a bad date. I played my part so perfectly that they never suspected a thing. And all the while, I was watching. Listening. Collecting. My first move was digital. Michael was arrogant in his carelessness. He thought I was technologically inept, a woman who still used our anniversary as the password for everything. He was wrong. It took me 3 nights, but I finally cracked the password to his secret email account. It was Rachel Leo 1. The jolt of adrenaline that shot through me was so strong it made my teeth ache. the inbox was a digital sewer of their affair. Hundreds of emails. Declarations of love that made my stomach turn. Explicit plans for secret rendezvous. And, most importantly, receipts. Digital receipts for boutique hotel rooms in the city, for jewelry I had never seen, for expensive dinners I had never been invited to. I stayed up until 3 a.m., the only light in the house the glow of the monitor on my face, the only sound the quiet whir of our home printer. I printed everything. Every sordid email, every damning confirmation. I organized them in a binder, creating a meticulous timeline of their deceit, cross-referencing every hotel stay with Michael's late nights at the office. Then, I followed the money. An online search and a few educated guesses at security questions led me to a secret bank account under Michael's name alone. For months, he had been systematically siphoning money from our joint savings, the account we had painstakingly built together for our future, for our retirement. He was transferring thousands of dollars, a steady bleed from our shared life, into his secret one. The statements told a sordid story of his profligacy. Payments to high-end boutiques where Rachel shopped. Payments to a car dealership for the down payment on the new SUV she was so proud of. And then I saw it, the line item that made my blood run cold, a recurring monthly transfer of $2,000, labeled Leo's college fund. The sheer, calculated audacity of it, the gall of funding his illegitimate child's future with the money I had earned and saved, stole the breath from my lungs. This wasn't just an affair, it was a hostile takeover of my life. This wasn't just about inheritance, this was about the systematic theft of my past, present, and future. The final piece of my plan required a performance of my own. It was the most critical move, the one that would checkmate them before they even knew they were playing a game. 3 weeks before the accident, I hired a private investigator for 2 days. A clandestine meeting in a coffee shop, a cash payment. The report he delivered was clinical and devastating, crystal clear photos of Michael and Rachel entering and leaving a downtown hotel, their arms around each other. The proof was now physical, undeniable. The next evening, I chose my moment. Michael was rushing to get ready for another late meeting, his mind already out the door. He was distracted, agitated, and radiating a guilt he was too weak to confront. He was perfect. I intercepted him at the kitchen table, a small stack of papers in my hand. My heart was pounding, but my voice was a masterpiece of casual calm. "Honey, before you go," I said, not looking up from the papers, Mark from the lawyer's office sent over some updated tax forms. "Something about the new property tax laws." He said we both need to sign. I handed him the pen. He gave the top page a cursory glance, saw the familiar letterhead of our family law firm, and scribbled his signature on the bottom line without a second's hesitation. He trusted me implicitly with all financial and legal paperwork, it was my domain. He never noticed that the document he was signing wasn't a tax form. It was a new, ironclad last will and testament. A will that I had instructed the lawyer to draft with one, single, unassailable clause: in the event of his death, his entire estate, the house, the savings, the investments, the 401k, everything, would pass directly and solely to me, his wife, Emily Rose Thompson. No provisions for future or previously unknown children. No loopholes. No ambiguity. He handed the pen back to me, pecked me on the cheek with a quick, distracted kiss, and rushed out the door to meet my sister. I stood in the silent kitchen, the freshly signed document heavy in my hands. It felt like a death certificate for the man I once loved. The call came on a gray, drizzly Tuesday morning. A multi-car pile-up on the interstate. A truck had lost control during a downpour. Michael, they said, had died instantly. I remember nodding into the phone, my throat too tight to form words. I thanked the state trooper for his call and then, with a strange, detached clarity, I began making the necessary arrangements. I was a ship captain in a hurricane, steering through the wreckage with a steady hand because the iceberg, for me, had already struck long ago. The funeral was a surreal performance. A blur of black clothes, wilting flowers, and hushed, awkward condolences. Rachel was the star of the show. She clung to me, her body racked with theatrical sobs, her face buried in my shoulder as she whispered, "I'll be here for you, Em. I promise. I'll get you through this." I remember the strange sensation of her tears soaking my dress and wondering if she could feel my heartbeat, steady and even, not the frantic, shattered rhythm of a grieving widow. It was almost expectant. In the weeks that followed, her true motives began to bleed through the cracks of her grief-stricken performance. She was a constant presence at the house, ostensibly to support me, but her eyes were always scanning, taking inventory. She'd make casual, probing remarks. "This house must hold so many painful memories for you now. All this space, just for you. Maybe you should think about selling. A fresh start, you know?" She was already trying to liquidate my assets. My assets. She'd rifle through the mail on the counter, asking pointed questions about insurance policies and bank statements under the guise of helping me get organized. Then came the invitation to Leo's first birthday. A part of me, the wounded, still grieving part, wanted to refuse, to lock the door and never see her face again. But the other part, the cold, calculating woman who was now in charge, knew I had to be there. This was the stage she had built for her grand, public declaration. It was only fitting that I be in the front row to watch the whole production burn to the ground. So I accepted. I chose my dress with care. The simple black sheath wasn't for mourning. It was my armor. It was my uniform for the battle to come. As I drove to her house that day, the signed, notarized will resting in my handbag like a loaded gun, I felt no fear. No sadness. Just the quiet, thrumming hum of a plan about to come to its inevitable, explosive conclusion. I was walking into the lion's den, but the lion had no idea I was the one who had built the cage, forged the bars, and held the only key. And so there we were. The party, the announcement, the stunned, suffocating silence. Rachel's declaration hung in the air, thick and toxic. The guests were a field of statues, forks halfway to their mouths, their eyes darting between me, the wronged wife, and my sister, the homewrecker. Rachel's smile was pure, undiluted triumph. She thought she had me. She thought I was a broken, grieving, helpless widow who would crumble under the weight of this public humiliation. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of her accusation press down on the room until it was almost unbearable. Then, I took a step forward. And another. I moved through the sea of shocked faces, my heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. I walked until I was standing right in front of her, so close I could smell the cloying mix of champagne and cheap perfume on her breath. My voice, when I spoke, was not a shout. It was not a whisper. It was low, clear, and it carried to every corner of the silent room. "Wow, Rachel," I said, my tone laced with a hint of mock admiration. "That's quite a story. You've really thought of everything." She laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound. "It's not a story. It's the truth. And this," she shook the outdated will in her hand, the paper crinkling aggressively, "is my proof. My lawyer will be in touch with yours on Monday. We can discuss the terms of the sale then. I'm sure you'll want to handle the divorce from my dead husband's ghost privately and quickly." The word divorce was meant to be a final, cruel twist of the knife. It barely registered. "That won't be necessary," I said smoothly. I reached into my own handbag, my movements unhurried, almost languid. My fingers closed around a single, crisp sheet of paper. I pulled it out. It was the new will. The real will. The one Michael had signed in our kitchen 3 weeks before he died. Notarized, legally binding, and utterly unassailable. "This," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel, "is the only legal document that matters now." I didn't hand it to her. I held her gaze as I placed it on the dessert table, right next to the half-eaten birthday cake. The sharp edge of the paper cut a clean, definitive line through a smear of blue frosting. The finality of the gesture, the sheer, cold audacity of it, was not lost on the room. Rachel's triumphant smirk faltered, then collapsed. Her eyes darted from my face to the paper and back again, a flicker of confusion warring with her arrogance. She snatched it up, her hands trembling slightly. I watched her face as she read. It was like watching a time-lapse video of a building demolition. First, confusion, as her eyes scanned the familiar legal jargon. Then, disbelief, as she registered the date at the bottom. And finally, pure, unadulterated panic as the single, brutal clause of the will registered in her brain. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty, gray mask of utter shock. The will was simple. It was brutal. It left everything to me. The house. The savings accounts, what was left of them. The investment portfolio. The life insurance policy. Even the car that she so loved to borrow. Michael's name was on every asset, but my name was the only beneficiary that mattered. There was no mention of a son. There was no provision for a secret family. There was nothing for her. Nothing. This is fake, she stammered, her voice a hoarse, strangled whisper that was a pathetic echo of her earlier triumphant tone. You faked this. He would never. It's notarized, Rachel, I said calmly, my voice a stark contrast to her rising hysteria. By the same respected family lawyer whose name is on the top of your document. Feel free to call him. I'm sure he'd be happy to confirm its validity. He remembers the meeting quite well. For a fleeting moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes beyond the panic. It was a flash of raw, undiluted, lifelong jealousy, a look that said, "Why do you always get everything?" It was the rotten core of it all. The affair, the baby, the money, it was all just a twisted, desperate attempt to steal the life she felt she deserved, the life that was mine. The guests were starting to murmur now, the tide of their sympathy visibly turning. An aunt of ours, a woman who had always doted on Rachel, looked at her with an expression of such profound disappointment it was like a physical blow. Rachel was no longer the wrong party in a tragic love story, she was a greedy, foolish woman who had just been publicly, spectacularly exposed. She lunged for the will on the table, her face contorted in a mask of rage. I'll tear this piece of trash up. My hand shot out and clamped down on her wrist. My grip was like iron. For all my quiet demeanor, I had a strength she had never seen. I wouldn't do that if I were you, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, a private, venomous current between the two of us. Careful. If you damage that, you'll have to pay for another certified copy. And from what I hear, raising a child on a paralegal salary, especially without a wealthy benefactor, is not cheap. There's no more secret college fund to dip into. She froze, her eyes wide with a new kind of terror. The terror of being known. She knew that I knew everything. I leaned in closer, the scent of her fear more satisfying than any champagne. And one more thing, I breathed, the words soft but laced with steel. I'd be very, very careful about making public claims regarding your son's paternity from now on. Especially claims that involve my late husband. I let go of her wrist and took a small step back, raising my voice just enough for the nearest guests to hear my next words clearly. You see, there are laws against defaming the dead. Slander. And I have every single text message you sent him. Every email. Every hotel receipt. I have proof of exactly what you were doing while he was alive. I let that sink in. I watched the last vestiges of her fight crumble into dust. She was trapped. Utterly and completely. My lawyer, I continued, my voice now as cold and sharp as a shard of ice, has already confirmed that in this state, what you did has a name. It's called alienation of affection. It's grounds for a lawsuit. A very, very expensive lawsuit. I reached into my purse again, my movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out a single 4x6 photograph. I didn't show it to the room. I simply let it slide from my fingers onto the table, face up, next to the will. It was one of the private investigator's shots. A crystal clear, damning photo of her and Michael, laughing as they walked into a boutique hotel, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. If you ever cross me again, I said, my voice a deadly, unbreakable promise, if you breathe a word of this to anyone, if you so much as look at me the wrong way, I will file that lawsuit. I will take you to court for custody of Leo, arguing that you are a morally and financially unfit mother. And I will use every last penny Michael left me to take away the one thing you have left. I will take your son. She made a sound, a choked, strangled gasp, like a drowning person's last breath. It was the sound of a soul breaking. She didn't scream or cry. She just stared at the photograph, her body trembling uncontrollably. The smug, confident woman who had tried to ruin me just minutes before was gone. In her place was a hollowed-out shell, her face a canvas of pure, abject terror. She had lost. And she knew, in that devastating, public moment, that she had lost everything. The party died a slow, excruciatingly awkward death. People started making excuses, their voices low, avoiding Rachel's eyes as they gathered their children and their coats. They'd offer me a quiet, sympathetic nod on their way out, a silent acknowledgement of my victory. No one said goodbye to Rachel. She was left standing alone in the middle of her living room, a pariah surrounded by deflating balloons and the cold, sweet wreckage of her own making. I drove home in a profound silence. The black dress felt light, not heavy. My lipstick was still perfectly intact. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed. It was from Rachel. A string of furious, incoherent threats, riddled with typos. She was going to tell everyone my secrets, she was going to ruin me, she was going to fight me. I didn't bother typing a reply. I simply went to my photo gallery, selected another one of the investigator's pictures, a different hotel, a different day, and sent it to her. The response was immediate: silence. A deep, profound, and, I knew, permanent silence. A few weeks later, I stood in what used to be Michael's home office. The heavy mahogany desk, the shelves of leather-bound architectural books, the faint, lingering scent of his cologne, it all felt like a museum exhibit from a life that no longer belonged to me. Beside me, a young, eager architect was unrolling a set of blueprints across the desk. We weren't discussing repairs or renovations. We were discussing a complete and total transformation. We were designing my new art studio. The heavy drapes have to go, I said, pointing. Floor-to-ceiling windows. I want as much light as possible. The dark wood paneling would be ripped out, replaced with clean, white walls. The built-in bookshelves would become storage for canvases and paints. It was more than just redecorating. It was an exorcism. I wasn't just taking back my house, I was taking back my life, my space, my future. I was actively, joyfully, building a new world on the ashes of the old one. Tonight, I'm sitting in that same kitchen where Michael unknowingly signed away his power, a glass of good red wine in my hand. For a long time, I thought the betrayal was the worst part. The classic knife in the back from the two people I trusted most in the world. But I was wrong. The worst part is the slow, creeping realization that comes after, the sickening understanding of how easy it was for them to believe you were blind, to see you as a fool, to underestimate you so completely. But that realization is also where your power begins. Because the moment you stop seeing yourself through their condescending, pitying eyes is the moment you become invincible. People think revenge is loud, it's screaming matches and broken dishes and dramatic, tear-soaked exits. They're wrong. True revenge is silent. It's the quiet, authoritative rustle of a notarized document. It's the steady, unseen click of a camera shutter. It's letting someone believe they've won, right up until the precise moment they feel the noose you've been tying for months tighten around their neck. My name is Emily. I'm 35 years old. My husband is gone. My sister is silenced. And this house, every last brick and board and blade of grass, is mine. Betrayal isn't a knife in the back. It's a mirror. It forces you to look at yourself and decide if you're going to bleed out on the floor, or if you're going to use the shattered pieces to sharpen yourself into a weapon. I made my choice. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but it was necessary. I have to ask, have any of you ever been in a situation where you had to find a strength you never knew you had? Let me know in the comments below. Your stories give me strength, too. And if you found any part of this story empowering, please consider giving it a like and subscribing for more. You never know whose life you might change.